This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by Songs for the End of the World by Saleema Nawaz. Signed copy is available at drawnandquarterly.com/librairie.
Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. On this episode, I am here with my producer, Dan Vadeboncoeur, and a very special guest, Saleema Nawaz, the author of Songs for the End of the World. Hello, Saleema.
Hi, Greg.
It's good to hear your voice again.
Yeah, likewise.
For the dear listener, it's really important that we have some transparency. You are not just some famous author that I begged for an interview, but instead somebody whom I've known for many, many years.
Yes, we actually know each other.
We actually know each other, yes. So we will try not to run too far down memory lane off of the beaten track of making stories. But if something embarrassing comes up, we'll just roll with it. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay, so that's my clumsy segue into Dennis Cooley's writing class that I tricked my way into, and you got there legitimately.
I forgot that you kind of talked your way into the class.
That's true, yeah. For the dear listener, Dennis Cooley is a very prolific and very talented author and poet, and he also taught advanced creative writing here in Winnipeg. And I'd heard from some other people that he was a great teacher and created a really amazing environment to explore writing. And I wanted to be there, but you had to have submitted work months in advance and been selected for the class. Instead of doing that, I just showed up and didn't leave. And eventually, Dennis let me stay.
It's a good strategy.
Yeah. He called me into his office after the first day and was like, "You are not allowed here. Everybody worked hard to be here, and I have never even seen any of your writing." And I said, "Dennis, some people have talent and some people have tenacity. And I bet you I have more of one of them than some of those people." And he laughed and he said, "Don't come next time." And I came, and then after that, he enrolled me in the class.
Well, you definitely pulled your weight in the class. You were an integral member of that OG writing class. Greatest of all time.
It was a pretty OG. I was trying to keep track of the number of people from that class who won Manitoba Book Awards.
A lot.
I think there's a lot. Yeah, there was something special there. And I think the first day I arrived, I heard John Toon read one of his poems. I heard you read an excerpt of a short story you were working on. And I heard J-Ball read an excerpt. And after that, I said, "My God, I can learn so much in this room. I just can't leave. There's no way I can leave." And so here we are all these years later. And none of us gave up. And I think that is really an important part. So that brings me to my next point. Your book is about, well, the present, but you wrote it in the past and predicted the future. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about how that all worked out?
So Songs for the End of the World, it's a novel about a handful of people, interconnected characters who are living through the opening weeks and months of pandemic, a novel coronavirus pandemic as it happens. That's a coincidence. And in my novel, it unfolds in 2020, which is also a coincidence, because I was writing it for a really long time.
The conspiracy theorists that listen don't believe you, but carry on.
I know. Well, you know what? I did something bad in that I dipped into Goodreads the other day.
Oh, no.
I know. And
Never.
I saw that I think there were some people who were saying apparently she wrote this before. And I was just like, oh my God, I have to get out of here. But I mean, yeah, there are definitely some eerie parallels between the book and reality, but I definitely wrote it before. I was writing it for a really long time. I sort of outlined part of it in late 2012 and started writing it in 2013, and was working on it until 2019, late 2019, but before this whole COVID-19 situation broke out.
I noticed that Margaret Atwood doesn't believe you either.
It's hard to know what Margaret Atwood thinks. I mean, I think I was very flattered that she mentioned she was reading the book. I think it was in an interview in the Boston Globe. Somebody asked her what she was reading. She said she was reading this. But the only thing she really said about it was that it was a peculiar book. And she sort of guessed that I might have been writing it for, she knew that I'd been writing it for at least 2 years, because of course she knows how long the publishing industry takes to sort of grind its gears over something. So she knew it had to be at least 2 years that I'd been working on it. But little did she imagine that I'm much less efficient a writer than she is, and I've been working on it for 7.
Most of us are not that efficient. I think one thing you should take away, you were a little self-deprecating there, but if Margaret Atwood is reading it to the end and mentions it as a book she's reading, it means it's interesting to the point that she wants to know what happens next. She does not have to spend her time reading a book she does not like. Imagine the number of books that get sent to her for blurbs and all the stuff that go along with it. And despite all of that, it's yours that has her attention.
And she thought enough about it to mention it in the interview as well.
Yeah.
Like, she's probably read a lot of books.
That's right. Now, did you put her up to it? I guess that's a conspiracy theorist.
I don't know her. I mean, I do believe the book was sent to her. I would be surprised if she went out and bought it. I think if you're Margaret Atwood, you never have to buy a book again, because people just, as you say, continually send them to you. But yeah, I'm certainly happy she was reading it. And peculiar. I mean, I'll take peculiar. That's great.
Oh, yeah. Because it means that she couldn't immediately guess the ending. And I'm sure in 20 pages of most books, she's like, oh, I know how that ends. I know how I would do that.
Yeah, probably.
Right? It's one of the things that I've always, I've said many times publicly of that class, much to the chagrin of everyone else who ever took that class, that you were the best of us in that class. And one of the things that I always noticed is that your writing, you use allegory and illusion often interwoven into the fabric and the sort of the underpinnings of all of your stories. Is this one the same? Is there an allegory and illusion that you were 7 years ago, you were stitching in there? Or is there something else in the foundation?
Well, I mean, it could be there and I'm just not conscious of it. I mean, I think that is something that happens pretty frequently is that stuff is in there and I'm not really aware until some, astute reader or a student or reviewer asks a really, insightful question. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. I never thought about that. And then I fully incorporate that into my talking about the book, going forward as though it was intended all along.
I find it so interesting and also gratifying because that you say that, because the reader is an active part of every book. And so many people kind of shout down from the mountain about what their book is supposed to mean, forgetting that it's a conversation. I find that really great.
Yeah, of course. The reader is an integral part.
The teacher in me loves that you take those students' answers. Well, you plagiarize the student answers as your own work.
Yeah, technically it's plagiarism, I suppose, but...
You haven't got much time, Mr. Quinn.
Commissioner, what's the use of kidding ourselves? We can't track down an unknown killer in 2 days.
Here's my hard-hitting journalism question for you.
Okay.
Actually, it's not. It's all about process, so you don't have to dodge any answers.
Okay.
What do you cut out of your drafts later that you wouldn't have been able to write unless it was there?
Oh, wow. Well, that is such an interesting question because, part of the reason this book took so long was all of the stuff that didn't make it into the book. And partially that has to do with the structure of it, because it has so many characters. It has quite a few main characters, more than in your typical novel. And it takes place in a few different timelines. And so in a sense, it's sort of endlessly modular. Like you could take this character and, write a couple chapters for them, or follow this other character and then see how they can connect back up, because that's part of the structure of the book, is how these characters are connected, some of them quite distantly. But so I did do that, unfortunately, spent a few chapters, like wrote a few chapters from this other perspective, and then ultimately realized, that's not really part of the central story. Like I'm not as interested in this character.
Is it just your interest that drives that? My question, the underpinning of my question is, how much do you know about what you're wanting to say before you start saying it?
Yeah, not as much as I wish I did, and as much as I vow to know before my next project, because I think that is something that can add a lot of time to a project if you're trying to write your way to what you're trying to say. Can be very time consuming. And so I have vowed, I have listened to our friend Jonathan Ball, J Ball's podcast about, outlining and planning and editing. And I've really taken it to heart.
Oh, and his constant assertion that writing, like, F the muse, writing is ditch digging. Just put the shovel and, start working.
Yeah, well, I mean, I totally agree with that part. It's craft. I always think about building something rather than like ditch digging, but it's the same thing. Like you're wielding a tool and you're working away at something. And so I definitely agree with that. And I'm completely convinced by the argument that it will go a lot faster if you plan it out ahead of time. And I thought that with this project, I had planned it more. I'd certainly done more planning than I had done with other things.
Well, and do you
but
find
not
that
enough.
multiple characters sort of force your hand in the necessity of planning?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think too, part of it was just that I switched forms partway through. Like I had initially conceived it as a collection of interconnected stories. But then reading it, it just sort of like felt like it wanted to be a novel. And so I was like, okay, I'm turning it into a novel. But then it sort of meant that all of these different stories, which became chapters, which were just about, they had just been about moments in characters' lives, right? And it was just sort of like dipping into their life and coming out again. But then to turn it into a novel, I suddenly needed arcs, for like complete character arcs for all of these characters. And instead of just having to do that for one or two characters, I had to do it for like 11 characters. And that was sort of very complex to like reverse engineer.
I want to back up into something you're saying there and not let you off the hook. You used the phrase like an epiphany occurred and you said, oh, I'm turning this into a novel.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the moment and the steps that go into you deciding that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And I would kind of like to reconstruct that moment for myself in which I thought, oh yeah, I'll just do that. Which turned into a very fateful and laborious decision. Ultimately I'm happy with that. But, I think it came out of, I think like other people might have been involved, like in the sense that I think like I'd gotten a friend to read it and my agent had read it. And I think they both said something similar. But I might be misremembering that. I'm not sure.
So wait, let me just clarify. Your agent had read part of what you were writing before you had decided that it was a novel?
No, like she read it in its sort of state of like, here, this is a collection of interconnected short stories. But they were so intertwined, and then towards the end, it just sort of felt like she was like, it sort of reads like a novel. And, maybe you just work, harder in that direction to turn it into one.
did you already know that was true?
Um, I'm not sure. And I mean, some of these things too, it's just a matter of terminology, like, do you call it a novel in stories, or do you call it a novel, or do you call it a interconnected short story collection?
Right.
Like some of it is just the label that you
Because you could
put
argue
on
that
it.
any novel that you read that has multiple points of view is really just a collection of interconnected short stories.
Yeah.
An argument can be made that those separate stories, like, for example, I haven't read a lot of George R.R. Martin's stuff, but I've seen it done. The internet is quite ruthless, where entire character arcs are just removed, and they say it's a better book if we just don't know about these characters.
Right.
And the fact that they can do it by simply deleting only those characters' points of view and not touching anybody else's just further underlines the point that, our notion of what a novel is an artificial. We've made that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
Why didn't you abandon it?
Well, I mean, at a certain point,
There's a lot of years. We've made fun of other people on this podcast, lovingly, that a book doesn't take that long to make.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't, but sometimes it does, is I guess the thing. I mean, part of it was that, so I had sold it in 2016. So a lot of the, extra writing and editing and me kind of running in circles really happened after that point. So
as a part of technical clarification, you sold it in 2016, right?
Yeah.
Now it was your agent had pitched it around.
Yeah.
Did it sell at auction or as a direct sale?
It was sold in a preempt.
In a preempt. Okay.
Yeah.
For the dear listener who has no idea what we're talking about, can you define that for them?
I think I can. It's basically when one publisher says, okay, we're going to kind of just step in and take it ahead of it going to auction.
Was that something you were happy with?
Yeah, I mean, sort of nice when someone, says they really want the book.
And they don't want to have to fight anyone for it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so in 2016, that's happened. How many revisions went into that manuscript before it's the one that we can listen to on audiobook or hold in our hands?
A lot. I mean, I didn't count. It would be too discouraging probably. But it was also kind of like a function of the way that I worked on it with my editor. So she had worked on a few other novels that had like a similar structure, which is I think why she was sort of like interested in it, or part of why she was interested in it in the first place. And so she had suggested, and this is what we did, is that we work with like strands of characters. So she was like, okay, so first we'll work with the like Emma strand, and then we'll work with the like Owen Edith strand. So we would just sort of like isolate that part of it, and work on that arc.
What did that look like? What are the tools of isolating an Emma strand that go on in your brain?
Well, in my brain, I'm not sure what went on in my brain. And I think part of what was hard for me was doing that kind of isolating, like, because what I needed to be doing was actually knitting them together. So I'm not sure what was going on in my brain, but in terms of like just the technical, what it looked like, she would just extract, like basically copy paste those chapters into a single document, and give me notes on just those chapters.
So that you could read the complete character's arc all as one solid piece. Right.
Exactly.
And for the dear listener who is wondering, like who is aghast at the idea that an editor would like cut up, copy and paste and send you your stuff back. The editor's job is, of course, not to tell you your book is bad, but to tease out clarity, right? They see something in it that they wish was a little bit sharper. Is have you worked with this editor in the past?
No, this was the first time I'd worked with her.
Are you comfortable naming this editor?
Yeah, for sure. It's Anita Chong, a McClellan and Stewart. She is like the master.
See, that's what I was going to say. Not everyone likes to name their editor because not everyone would call their editor the master, as you have done. So this speaks to both your character and hers, I think. When that clarity would come into play, is that one of the things that caused characters to be edited out of the book?
Yeah, like eventually. I mean, I think at the beginning, I had kind of a different structure in which instead of kind of starting in the present and sort of dipping back very selectively into the past, I think I had the whole thing chronological. So there's like a chapter with this Emma character who sort of goes on to become a rock star. But there's a part where she's traveling the world on a boat with her sister, which is actually a story I wrote for Cooley's class. But anyway.
Whoa. That goes all the way back to then?
Yeah, yes. It was like part of my like final portfolio.
Do you, is that, okay, so you wrote a short story that we read, and for the dear listeners' sake, when the class ended, I was dissatisfied with the amount of time I had had with all of these very brilliant writers. And so I invited all of those people to continue coming to class at the same time every week, but at my house instead of at the university. And we just kept sharing and workshopping stories and just working on the craft. And you had a story where there was a character in it who she was going to like a Catholic mass, and she made this observation about magic, that it's a sin not to believe in. And that has actually haunted me as a writer ever since that day.
I don't know what story you're talking about, and I don't remember writing that. And now
God.
Saleema, I really want to.
It's changed my life, and it is just forgotten. It's just one of these things that you cast off as a lost draft.
No, but this is the thing. I don't lose anything. Like I literally, part of my novel is this thing that I wrote for our class. So I'm just like wondering what this other story could possibly be.
I have a few of those early drafts squirreled away, kind of like relics of a bygone era that like give me strength, like little chat books from that time. And everyone from that class who published a book, I have a space where all of those books sort of live together as if the class never disbanded.
That's so nice.
It's also creepy, depending on if it's being directed by Fincher, then I'm a psychopath, and if it's if it's Terry Gilliam, then I seem eccentric and wonderful. It depends on who's directing that scene.
Definitely a Gilliam scene.
So
anyway, just to pick up the thread of what I was saying, is that so initially I had that story where Emma is a child on a boat. That originally came first. And so it was a story really centered on her and her sister, Domenica. And because it came first, the sort of few people who had read it, like a friend of mine and also my editor and my agent, they were all like, what happens to the other sister? Like, I just really felt like that was dropped, like you introduce her at the beginning and then, you'd think I would realize this, but that's like, oh, what you put at the beginning makes a big difference to what needs to come next. And so, I ended up, so in 2016, that chapter was still first. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to write more about this other sister, even though, at the time I didn't really care about her that much, which I'm sure channeled its way into the chapters I wrote about her. They were probably not very interesting. And so after having done that, spending this time writing these chapters and then kind of being like, you know what, I don't think these are very good. I don't think they belong in the book. And so months can go by this way, writing things that don't end up in there. And, in that case, I'm not really sure, I needed to write that to get to what the book finally is. it was more just sort of realizing that changing the structure, creates different expectations and has more momentum. And I don't need to write about the characters I don't want to write about.
Were there places where you just said to your editor, this is how this part of the book is, and I'm just not changing it?
I would say there were very few places where I had, extreme pushback, because I had so much trust in her sort of incisive reading. I think one place there's a character, like a minor character that I felt a lot of affection for, who's this folk singer called Gertie, who has kind of abandoned, she kind of like went off the grid in the 70s and then sort of recently resurfaced, and kind of starts making music again after this like long absence in the woods. And I had like a lot of affection for Gertie, and my editor was like, you know what, there's just like too much Gertie in this scene. Like,
You're playing
really
favorites.
yeah. And I was just like, you know what, I have just like, I've cut so much, like I am keeping Gertie, like I need Gertie, she makes me happy. So I fought for Gertie, even though she's kind of really a tangent, but I wanted her to be there.
When you are writing this many characters, well, first of all, I don't think I've ever, I'm trying to think. I've never undertaken anything that just had that many characters or points of view or thing. I just find it daunting, just the concept of it. What's a way that helped you break it down into measurable, easy to handle pieces that maybe people don't think about as part of the writing process?
Well, I mean, another reason for the structure of the book and for having so many characters was that I was really writing some of those chapters initially as short stories, or kind of just as complete chapters, like moments in time. So when I was doing them, and this was like when I was, pregnant with my daughter, and then when she was like a newborn, and so I was really didn't have the headspace or the time to kind of think like I am writing a novel, capital N. It was really like, I'm going to work on my story about Sarah and just try to do that. And then I'm going to work on this other story about Owen and do that. And so I think framing them initially as stories was sort of where that idea came from. And then it was really only later that I was sort of like, okay, no, this is a novel. But I think thinking about it, sometimes thinking too much about the dauntingness of the endeavor can be paralyzing.
When did a couple of things. These characters,
yeah.
Something that I've always observed about you is that you speak about them with their names, their full names. You talk of them as real people, as if someone you could meet on the street, which is different from a lot of people's strategies I see, because when they're editing, they find it difficult to kill those characters. So they don't, like don't name a puppy you're not going to keep kind of idea.
Right.
So I see that you put so much care into making them seem so real. When did you decide that they all had to get sick?
Well, that was something, sort of called for by the plot itself, but there was some, so the working title of the novel for a long time was How to Avoid the Plague. And in my initial, version, like a lot of people avoided the plague. Like I would say most of them, and most of the main characters kind of got through, unscathed. But then really, the few people who read it were like, Saleema, like you can't have a pandemic novel where nobody gets sick and dies. Like more people, like this has to happen to more people. They can't all avoid it.
Do you think that those people who gave you that advice early on regret urging you to recognize how dangerous a pandemic was now? Like they're there saying, I remember telling Saleema More people should die if a worldwide novel coronavirus pandemic occurred. And now they're like, damn it.
No, I don't think any of them
You don't think so?
are superstitious. No.
So just to be clear, it was not a evil cabal of lizard people that whispered to you that this was coming, and you're trying to let us know that you've known for a long time.
That's right. Or it was not that. Whatever the negative of
she's
that.
not sure
I
now.
like the way you gave two answers there. The internet's going to eat that up, because that was one of the, that is a reviewer that I found. That was sort of their perspective. And I find it just baffling that that perspective exists out there, number one. Number two, that someone would write such a long and thoughtful review about lizard people related to your book. But then,
That's not real. That's not real.
no, that's real.
Save that for the sequel.
That's real. Yeah, the sequel is called Lizard People in the New World, right? Is that true? World exclusive, Saleema Nawaz, Lizard People and the New World.
I knew you guys were crazy.
Wait a minute, Neff, wait a
Wait,
minute.
for what? Somebody else to die?
For the listener who doesn't know your work and doesn't know your writing practices and doesn't know those things, I want to let them know that you write spec scripts for TV, that you wrote an audio adventure for another company recently. You are working on a musical as well as your novels and stories. So how do you switch? How do you decide what to work on? And what does your day look like? What's a writing day or week or however you block that time out in your brain? I'd love to know when and how often you switch gears.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would love to hear from somebody more productive how to switch gears, because I feel like this whole lockdown time has been, really challenging with a small child at home. And even now when she's not home quite as much, I'm finding it really hard to work. Like I find it hard to kind of disengage from the news, like constantly refreshing the news, disengage from Twitter. It just feels like the events that are going on are on such a scale and they're so important that it's hard for me to pry myself away from just staring at them. And
yeah, because there's so much uncertainty now, right? We, those of us in, not just as, publishing aside, if you're a parent, you're worried about what is the world you can promise. I mean, so much of, our kids are a little bit older, but so much of my concern on a day-to-day basis is how much enthusiasm for the future that I am trying to infuse them with is potentially a lie.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no.
That they will resent later.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot going on right now. And I wouldn't say that I have a typical day right now at all, or that I'm able to, switch between things easily. I sort of thought, like having these different projects will be great because then, if I'm not in the mood to work on a novel, I can work on something a bit lighter. But yeah, I'm having trouble balancing. I'm having trouble being like, oh, there's so many, like not being sort of like having my head spin around like, oh, there's so many things to work on. And not being sure which one to go to next. So I feel like every day is just a little bit different. Every day I just sort of keep trying. But I have no formula.
One of the expressions I use when people ask me the same thing, because I work on lots of different stuff at the same time, it's sort of has always been my practice, but lately it's been it's a more difficult thing to do, and reminding myself that publishing is a byproduct of writing. It's not the point of writing. That for me, the point of writing is self-archaeology. And so one of the things I set for myself as a goal when I sit down to write, it actually spins back to a time when I was about 10 years old. My aunt took me to an archaeology dig site, actually. And it was a very active dig site. It was it was here at the Forks. There was lots of people there, and they brought lots of volunteers because there were so many artifacts that they just needed the hands. And I would get so worked up because you have this little brush. and you're
Yeah.
furiously trying to uncover things, but there's so many potentially cool artifacts that I would switch and switch and switch and switch and switch, and I felt like I was getting nowhere, and then I would just like was so frustrated. And my aunt said to me, like, as long as you stay here, as long as everyone else, things are being uncovered. And I've
That's so cool. I love that.
right, and I've applied that to my own writing. Like when I feel really like, oh, I'm just not getting anywhere, as long as I don't quit,
Yeah.
even if I'm switching, even if it's 2 sentences on that and a paragraph for that and a stanza over here and a set direction over there and an email there, as long as I don't quit, I stay in that same place, I feel like things are being uncovered.
That's great. I love that phrase.
So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but it's particularly, you know, both of our kids are also not at school, so they're home, you know, round the clock. And I mean, I have an advantage is that I spent 10 years in the classroom, so managing the teaching side of it is actually a great relief to me. It's actually the one thing I know I can do well. I have a hell of a lot of fun doing it, and we can, you know, and I toyed around for a long time going to get my master's in constructivist teaching models and theory. So like, this is me putting my money where my mouth is, or my time really, where my mouth has been for all this time. So it's, that part has not been the hard part. It's when the downtime comes, when I do have to work, when I do have to be otherwise engaged, that a little bit of that guilt comes in, that like, we're just making books, or we're just making stories, or this is just a comic, or this is just a monster for a horror movie. Like, is any of that as valuable as the real things occurring right now?
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard not to kind of wonder or fall into that way of thinking at times, for sure.
Saleema, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When all this started happening, when the pandemic started and everything, you know, started like shutting down, how did you feel about this? Having written a book about it, kind of like, did you feel prophetic in any way? You predicted this? This is now coming to pass?
Well, you know, at the very beginning, it was really more, there was that aspect, as well as this sense of like, because there was a few weeks before my book was released as an ebook, because of course it was always planning. We were planning on releasing it in the fall as a print book, and so we, you know, the publisher had been watching what had been going on with the pandemic, you know, very closely, and they'd been having a lot of meetings, and I wasn't privy to those meetings, but you know, basically everybody was kind of freaking out about what we were going to do, and there were a few weeks where I just felt very sad and worried, and you know, obviously about the pandemic, but also like from a sad little selfish point of view, like, oh my gosh, my book, like maybe it won't even come out, like, you know, like clearly the context in which it is going to be released is going to be completely different, and just there was a lot of uncertainty for me about that, as well as this sense of like that I had so much to say about social distancing and how we needed to come together, and I had a lot of things to say about it, but couldn't say any of them. You know, like I had written this whole, I spent years like writing this, but nobody knew, and not even my close family knew the degree to which my novel was so similar, or seemed to be so similar to what was happening, and so that was hard, and then I'll sort of, while, you know, early March, you know, my publisher was sort of working out what they were going to do, and they were like, okay, we need to like add this publisher's note to the beginning, so people understand like why it's so similar and how it could possibly be so similar, like, and we need to add this frequently asked questions thing at the back, so you can explain that you did all of this research and that you're not psychic and da 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 da. And so, you know, early March, I was like sort of tasked with doing these things, you know, with all of this like crazy alarming, you know, news coming out, and the uncertainty of what was happening with the book, and my sense that, you know, now certain things were not going to be possible for it, like probably selling it in the States, and Yeah, and so writing that stuff when I thought the book was already finished, like it was sort of in that mode of like, I never have to touch it again. And I was like, actually, no, you do. You need to now explain, like account for yourself as to how on earth you could have done this.
And
so
was it
that
just
was
because, sorry to interrupt, but was it just
no, it's
because
okay.
you knew this was a strong possibility of it happening? I've had people tell me that since this all went down. I've had people I know in healthcare say it was always something that was going to come back and that this is just inevitable.
Well, and before you answer, Saleema, I'll mention that I've been working over the pandemic with Dr. Gillian Horton.
Yeah.
She interviews doctors who are on the front lines of the pandemic. And one consistent theme that has come up is that since SARS happened, doctors have been warning about the inevitability of this for a long time. And to me, I was like shocked. I was like, what do you mean you've all known this was coming? So, and then what do you mean Saleema's got a book coming out that is all about this? How come everyone knew but me?
Right. Me too. I didn't know either. SARS did not seem to be as big of a deal to me as it did. I guess it affected people in Toronto much more than it did anywhere else in Canada, but it did not seem to be certainly not as big as this is.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So I'll throw that back at you then, Saleema.
So I mean that's just it. So like epidemiologists have been saying, it's not a matter of if, it's when, like it's just like it is going to happen. And so I certainly knew that. But I wouldn't say that I had like internalized it to any great degree. I think with any kind of that sort of human wishful blindness, like knew that on a rational level, but I certainly wasn't writing the novel as some kind of like warning or saying that was going to happen anytime soon.
Right, because a plot, right? A story needs something to happen that brings out emotional content for an author to delve. And so here's just a great what if scenario.
Yeah. It was a set of events. And initially, I think I had set it in like 2017. Like I was always just trying to set it in the near future. And then, I needed to push that date because, I went past it in the editing process. And so it was like, okay, I'll move it to 2020.
You may find some commiseration. I don't know if you follow any of the press around William Gibson's books, but his newest one, he had a bunch of prescient things about Trump's election in his book, which of course he wrote as fiction, and then it became fact. And so then he had to change the things he had done as fiction, which were now fact, so that he changed other things that were fact into fiction just to stay ahead of the truth, because he was writing so close. So you may find some commiseration in the things he had to say about that. A lot of reviewers, obviously, and not just reviewers, but like press, whatever, everyone wants to talk about what's the same, what's happening, everything that you predicted. What are some of the things that are in there that are different, that just have absolutely nothing to do with the present day that a reader might want to know about?
Oh, that are in the book?
Yeah.
Oh, good question. I haven't like delved into the book really since I finished it. And I feel like it's sort of been overwritten with like the actual events of what's happened. So I'm trying to remember.
Well, and you don't have to reach too far. I will mention to the dear listener that's like, wait, shouldn't you know your book backwards and forwards? I will tell you, at least from my perspective, I'm doing a bunch of press now for a book that kind of got killed. Its launch got killed also by the pandemic, which is The Automatic Age. And I'm well into its sequel and I've finished 2 other complete books since I wrote that book. And so now when people are asking me very specific questions about it, it feels like a test that I don't know the answer to, that I once read. I know I read that in the textbook. I know I could find where the answer is in the textbook, but I couldn't tell you what the answer is. So don't feel bad if you feel like you're on the spot for some specific, cogent delivery.
Yes.
Of an
Well,
answer.
that is exactly how I feel. I guess, so one thing that happens in the book, which we have not, seen now, and it maybe is a bit far-fetched, is that there's this benefit concert that happens in Vancouver for sort of as a benefit for the United States, which is sort of struggling with the pandemic in the novel.
That's true. That happened. The United States struggling part.
Except
happened.
we can't have a giant concert
can't have a
to
giant
benefit
concert,
them.
that's
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean by it's perhaps a bit far-fetched. But it's happening in Vancouver, which in the world of the novel has not had any cases. So they think it's safe to have this large crowded event.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
You two men, listen to me. I've got something to tell you.
Mother Superior, do you want to tell listeners about that book or Bone and Bread, other things that you've worked on and what you like about them? You have a backlist that they could go dig through. And the lens by which you can answer that question is, how is this book different from other things you've written?
Oh, yeah. Well, great question. Yeah, I mean, it's different. So Songs from the End of the World, I realized this was actually one of those things where, a reader says something to you insightful and you're like, oh, yes, that's exactly it. It's kind of the exact opposite of Bone and Bread in almost every way, in that, Bone and Bread was like very close first person narration, one narrator, very closely centered in on, two sisters and a son. And, this is, third person, many perspectives, men and women, not set in Montreal, set like all over. So yeah, in that sense, it's very different. Bone and Bread is very much a Montreal novel about these two sisters growing up who live on top of a bagel shop in Mile End. And yeah, as you mentioned, Mother Superior, it's a short story collection. Many of the short stories I wrote in Winnipeg. Probably some of them were at our Wednesday night writers group at some point. Although I'm still struggling to remember that line that you mentioned and what story that is from.
It was also a story about sisters. Now, it's been a long time since I read it, but it was also a story about sisters. And this main character is, I believe, in my recollection of the reading, is walking on the waterfront, recalling a sermon she's at, and she is remembering light through the stained glass window, remembering the what's it called, communion. Is that where you have the wafer?
Yeah.
Yeah, remembering communion then, and talking about how a priest is asserting to her that this is not a metaphor, that this is legitimately the body of Christ. And she says, or is thinking about how, well, then that's magic. And they're like, well, no, magic isn't real. And the paradox of the idea of belief versus faith was like a fundamental sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, crux in the story. But why it struck me, and I'll mention this, this is just me laid bare before the author of that ancient, long-forgotten work, is why it struck me is at that time when I was writing, I was all about plot. I was like, how do I ensure that people can clearly understand what I intend for this book? And in your stories, I would find I was more interested in what people were thinking, what they were feeling, why they were feeling it, where those ideas came from. And for me, that the job of a writer's group and a sharing writing is to look and search for other skill sets to see how other people are doing it well. And I just found that when I would return to your writing, that was always what I found in it, is that I was more interested in the characters than necessarily what had occurred.
Right. Well, I think that probably mirrors like what my own interest was in them as well. Although I'm trying to get more interested in, things that happen, because it turns out that is really what makes you want to turn the page, is to find out, what happened.
That is how you sell a book. It's true. What's interesting too, to me, is because you're saying that you're writing TV pilots and some spec scripts and doing work for the screen, which is of course so plot driven. Yeah, well,
I should add that this is something I'm trying to do. I'm learning how to do it, because I would love to write for TV. And, from what I've heard, rooms can get staffed with people who, have skills, but who, you can have someone who's stronger on plot. You can have someone who's stronger on character.
Yeah, and I've been in a couple of rooms like that, and I've met people who make their living as being the only people who say, right, here's the script, make them sound more like people and less like plot devices.
See, I would love to do that.
Right? You would be the perfect, that's why I bring it up. You're the silver bullet. If there's a producer listening to this, Saleema has a few unproduced spec scripts that she would love to talk to you about, but she wants to keep all of her IP. She's going to keep the intellectual property rights. She's going to keep the entertainment rights. She will lease them or sell you on maybe a 1 or 2 year commitment, but not longer than that.
Yeah, right.
That's my advice to you, Saleema.
I'm just like, hire me. I need to write your stuff.
How different is it to you between script and prose?
Well, like I said, I'm still learning. Like it feels.
That's why I want to
Yeah,
ask.
well, it feels like more fun, and that's probably just because I haven't been doing it for as long. But I find it. I've always found it pretty easy to write dialogue, but then it's like, okay, well, how do you compress the scene? Like, how do you get in and out? Like, I think that's where I'm realizing I need to work on things, or that's where it gets tricky, or it can get tricky.
Well, and your editor's assertion that, you lump a character's collected actions together to create their arc is absolutely at play in most writers' rooms for TV. Mm-hmm. So you already did that. You're already expert at that. You can say it with confidence.
Yeah, good.
Right, so you're already there. Saleema, I have greatly enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, me too.
Where can people find your book? Where would you prefer they find it? There's lots of places. It's available everywhere, but do you have a favorite bookstore that you'd like them to order it from?
Oh, well, any local independent bookstore, but my favorite here in Montreal is Drawn and Quarterly bookstore, Librairie Drawn and Quarterly, and they actually have a lot of signed copies right now, and they ship across Canada.
Marvelous. Well, thank you so much for being our guest here on Super Pulp Science, where normally we would encourage you to join the fight and make comics. But as long as you're writing, you can find something for it to fit into later.